Okay, the discussion section. This is the best section. This is where authors are making sense of their findings, connecting them to previous research, acknowledging limitations, and suggesting future directions. So we're going to go through these. So remember, discussion sections usually open up with a little bit of a summary of what happened, so we can see the study drew on the concept of psychological ownership in organizational psychology and applied it to communication privacy management framework to better understand the sharing behavior among a sample of U.S. parents. Based on previous research, the study proposed 2 dimensions, possession and responsibility, and explore the relationship with each other, RQ1, with sharing team behavior, RQ2, and motivations, RQ3. Findings revealed a modest correlation between the 2 dimensions of psychological ownership, leading to a decision not to combine them in subsequent analyses. Both possession and responsibility demonstrated significant relationships with shared team behavior, and most of the motivational factors, although in opposite directions. Possession was generally linked to stronger motivations for and greater engagement in shared team. Responsibility was more often a mitigating factor, although its relationship was mixed. Study was also interested in the extent to which motivations might mediate the relationship between psychological ownership and sharing team behavior. That was RQ4. After accounting for motivation, both possession and responsibility remain significant predictors of some, although not all, of sharing team outcomes. Overall results suggest that in the U.S., parents' psychological ownership of their children's private information is a significant factor in their sharing team decisions. And then they had some demographic differences. So that's our little summary. Tells us everything we need to know about what they found. So, remember, next they usually will start talking about connections with other research, but because in this study they were also looking at these dimensions, it mentions in here, consider 2 dimensions of psychological ownership, possession, and responsibility. The current results did not provide unequivocal support for the inclusion of responsibility as a dimension. However, it would be premature to conclude on the basis of one single study that it's not really a dimension. So, cool. Responsibility in other meetings. We should maybe try to measure it different ways. Future research. Okay. Central interest of the study is the relationship between parent psychological ownership, of kids' information, and sharing team behavior. Possession was positively related to all 3 behaviors. Now we're tying back to previous research. The finding supports CPM's premise that people share private information when they believe it's theirs to share. So this kind of goes into that. And then the finding that possession and responsibility pulled parents in opposite directions is consistent with CPM's assertion that information management is dialectic. So connection back to previous theory and research, etc. Possession and responsibility were also associated with sharing team motivations and explains this. It tries to talk about how this links to other research from Holiday et al. Talk about items in the motivational factor or indicators of loving and caring. Relationship between possession and responsibility and sharing team behavior showed stability in some areas and changes in others after motivations were included. This is talking about that mediation model. Findings affirm the value of including possession and responsibility, suggest parents perceive possession, and then here's a future research. Future research may wish to examine other factors that might mediate the relationship. Okay. Another interest of this study was variations across parent characteristics. So secondary to theoretical focus, there was some interesting stuff. I kind of talk about this stuff. And then your future research should seek to replicate the current findings. So this is interesting. Calling for replication is an important part of science, and especially because this study had a lot of limitations. So this is a good thing to call for replication. Finally, parents who use social media, blah, 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 this is consistent with prior findings. So again, linking to prior research. Theoretical implications, because they use this particular theory of CPM, this is a section talking about how this advances our understanding of CPM, how this advances our understanding of psychological ownership. Practical implications, this is an example of translational research. It's cool that this journal has this as part of what they do. And so this is talking about like stuff that parents and teachers and educators should know. And then we get down to the limitation section. Remember, limitations are really important to find. These are not the research findings. They are things that the author wishes they had done differently or challenges with the sample, measurement, procedures that could impact the results. So there's a couple limitations here, and they list them out, which is pretty common for authors to do. First, mTurk sample was not representational. We know this because, there are all these issues with self-selection on mTurk, who's choosing, this sort of thing. Second, the data in the study was cross-sectional, could not establish causal order. We've already talked about this. This is cross-sectional. It can't establish causality because there's no temporal order. So this is a totally legit limitation. Third, as an initial investigation, the study only focused on psychological ownership, sharing team motivations, and sharing team behavior, leaving out other theoretically interesting variables in the CPM, such as all this other stuff. Future research should include these variables. Okay. Fourth, the current study did not account for the diverse context in which shared team decisions are made. Future studies should adopt design and measures that allow for greater contextual sensitivity. Great. Okay. So that is 4 big limitations. Sometimes limitations are in a subsection like this. Sometimes they're not. They might be just embedded within the discussion. But remember that we often see future limitations directly linked with limitations. Studies cross-sectional, so future research should be longitudinal. Study samples are representative. Future research should have a better sample, etc. And remember, it's often our measurements sucked and our samples sucked for the things that we see in the discussion. Just as a reminder, conclusion usually just kind of sum things up. So yeah, that's it for the discussion section, the best section to read.